So I'm adding this just to give a contrast. We've been talking about the brain size increase and how it made us so special and how we managed to survive and outlast Neanderthals and all the others, Floresiensis and so on and so forth. But now there is the conundrum of a shrinking human brain. Obviously, the first hypothesis proposed would be that maybe the body size is also shrinking and hence the brain size is shrinking, but it's not clear at all. So modern man's shrinking brain from this site here, for millions of years, the hominid brain has grown increasingly bigger, but for the last 10,000 years, the human brain has been shrinking at an alarming rate, and no one really knows why. And there are also details about whether we have reached the thermodynamic limit in terms of how much smarter you can get with more neuronal connections and so on, because the heat that is produced has to be dissipated and so on and so forth. So it becomes very interesting, and obviously I'm not an expert on it at all. So I'm just going to give you another brief view into why the Sapiens brain is shrinking, just in the context of how it increased in size, and we talked about potential relation to climate and diet and so on. So we'll look at some hypotheses here as well, including how digital technologies like Google may be affecting our brain wiring as well. But of course the shrinking started well before Google came along. Small brains here, we're going here in time as well. 400 cubic centimeters Australopithecus afarensis to here Robustus, Paranthropus, Homo ergaster, and so on, from more than 3 million years ago to 1 million years ago, and then going in this direction here, forward in time, Erectus, Neanderthalensis, Sapiens, Sapiens Cro-Magnon, and the modern human. The brain went up to 1500 cubic centimeters and is now down to 1350 cubic centimeters. So obviously significant increase as we saw, and then continued decrease. So brain size in cubic centimeters millions of years ago. Here you see the size again. So just revisiting the same thing here, you can see how the jumps happened in size, especially when we came here into more recent times. So if we then zoom into the last 10,000 years ago, it seems we started at 1500 cc on average here, and then we have been steadily going down to about 1350 cc, as we said before. For the past 800,000 years, brain size has increased at a rate of about 7 cc every 10,000 years. But in the past 10,000 years, brain size has decreased by 150 cc. That's over 200,000 years of brain growth lost in just 10,000 years. And there is a similar figure in this infographic showing that the body size has also shrunk in the Holocene, but the brain size is shrinking faster. So if we became agriculturalists, moving less, more communications and social networks, fertility rates, and everything else, why is the brain actually shrinking? So that's not so obvious. I don't know why I repeated this graph. I keep doing this, sorry about that. But around 800,000 years ago, the Earth started experiencing climate fluctuations, which coincided with the fast brain growth. So we started having Pleistocene glacial deglacials we talked about, with Danskerd-Ushker events happening at around 1500 years, Heinrich events at a bit slower time scales, rapid deglaciation, slow glaciations, and so on and so forth. And we already mentioned that correlations with climate variability versus climate constancy and so on have been hypothesized, and there are positive and negative correlations. So as we went from 3 million years ago to 2 million years ago, we came out of the permanent El Nino into more variable El Nino, and then we got into this 100,000 year time scale. So how does that affect things in terms of body size and the brain size? Cold weather is survived by bigger bodies and therefore bigger brains. Warming trends in the past 20,000 years have favored smaller bodies and therefore smaller brains. Is this true that climate can drive body size? Neanderthals were maybe bigger bodied and bigger brains, but they are not necessarily smarter. But is our brain becoming smarter and more efficient and not so much dumber? So the question of what is smarter, what is dumber, obviously is not answered very easily. So these are the ideas proposed. Domestication. As a population becomes less aggressive, brain size decreases. What do you know? So human behavior, there are debates about whether we are becoming more peaceful or not, and in general it turns out the optimistic view is that at least in the 20th century into the 21st century, even though it looks like there are always wars going on and we are always killing each other, person-to-person violence and deaths are apparently decreasing, but wars, state-sponsored killings are taking more lives. So this idea of less aggressive brain is an interesting one because it isn't clear how it is related to social networking, so information revolution and so on. Okay, lots of research there you can look up. Social support. As complex societies emerged, those with smaller brains could survive with the help of others. A higher survival rate allowed smaller brains to populate the gene pool. So now we have societies, welfare programs, healthcare systems, schools, and so on for people with smaller brains. I don't want to imply smarter, stupider, anything, but just that social support is higher for helping people to survive with different abilities, let's say. Okay. Vision. Our ancestors had bigger eyes and a larger virtual cortex because good vision was necessary for survival, but as social support increased, vision became less important. Those with smaller visual cortexes had more resources available for social regions of the brain and thus increasing the chance of revolution. But now we can use glasses. I'm wearing glasses, so even if we don't have good vision, we can get help with glasses. So how does that affect our brain now? So this paper, again, what we looked at before, looked at ants because they are eusocial creatures that live in large colonies and very cooperative, and they fight wars together, they use chemical weapons, they enslave the losers, they do agriculture in terms of growing some sort of fungi for food, and they have a governance structure and so on and so forth. That goes into also genetic questions about how eusociality is maintained, because the worker ants do not necessarily transmit directly their genes, because queen breeds and then there is select breeding. So why then do worker ants support the colonies? Do they lose something, or are they managing to support their genetic materials propagation by being part of the colony? Those kind of questions go in a different direction. Edward O. Wilson has written a lot about that that you can read up. So this one, looking at the ants, suggests our analysis supports the hypothesis that the recent decrease in brain size may instead result from the externalization of knowledge and advantages of group level decision making, what is called a larger brain or a social brain. Not social brain is different. Decision making due in part to the advent of social systems of distributed cognition and the storage and sharing of information. So when things are invented, it's not just one person, there is a whole team that is working to do it together, and the information is shared, and it's not a zero-sum game that somebody can build a phone and make money and you can buy it and use the phone and benefit from it. So sharing of information and creating a lot of non-zero relations. Humans live in social groups in which multiple brains contribute to the emergence of collective intelligence. Although difficult to study in the deep history of Homo, the impacts of group size, social organization, collective intelligence, and other potential selective forces on brain evolution can be elucidated using ants as models. Okay, so I'll just conclude by raising the issue of Google that I mentioned before. So digital amnesia is essentially where we know where to find the information, so we don't bother to remember, and number of phone numbers we used to remember has dropped, even because you call to a lot of people, you message a lot of people, you are on social networks, but you don't necessarily remember the numbers anymore like before. Okay, so digital amnesia in practice, the majority of connected consumers in the UK can't recall critical phone numbers from memory, including 71% those of their children, their children's schools, their place or work, their partner, and so on and so forth, their childhood numbers. Okay, so the Kaspersky lab findings suggest that our inability to retain important information is due to the fact that we are handing over responsibility for remembering it to digital devices such as smartphones. So this is called digital amnesia, or the Google effect, and it is argued that it is really beginning to affect our brain, and Kaspersky lab says it is in fact really dangerous in whatever sense you can think about. Okay, so this again raises the question of dependence of the brain size on diet, on social networks, on the use or lose kind of phenomena. By not remembering things, are we losing brain capacity, and is the brain shrinking related to that, and so on. So obviously brain and behavior are complicated and related to each other for sure, but we don't know exactly how. So we will leave it and then move on to more of the climate and early hominin evolution and dispersal, speciation, and so on. Okay.